Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. It is absolutely a delight to have my friend Chris Widener here with us today. Chris has been named one of the top 50 speakers in the world and is a member of the Motivational Speakers Hall of Fame. Chris has written 22 books, and his books have been translated into 14 languages. He is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal best-selling author and has given 2,500 speeches all over the world. And I happen to know that some of those crowds are as large as 25,000 people. In fact, just this week, speaking to about 10,000, and it's just remarkable. Welcome.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, would you be willing to share a little bit about how you got into this line of work, motivational speaking, influencing?
Yeah, absolutely. So it started out, I was a pastor from 1988 until 2002, but I was what they call a church planter, which means you don't go to an already established church where they have people there and they've got budgets and they've got money. I was the 25-year-old kid they sent into a town that didn't have a church and said, go start one. So even when I was a pastor, I was very entrepreneurial. And so I had no people, there was no salaries, there was none of this. The denomination I was with didn't have any money for us. So I always tell people they gave me a SWAT on a fanny and a go get 'em tiger. And so that's what I did. I went in. So I had to make some money somehow. And I've always been good at talking. My mom at one point, when I sort of got some cred in the speaking world, my mother said, she asked me one day how much I make, giving speeches. And then she said, wait a minute, people pay you to do what I told you all those years to stop? Because I drove my mother nuts. My mother's worst present she ever gave me, worse from her perspective, great from my perspective. She gave me a Mr. Microphone. Do you remember Mr. Microphone? It was a little microphone. You're too young to remember this, but you got to Google it. They had great ads. Mr. Microphone. It's a microphone. You put a couple of AAA batteries in it, and it connects to your radio, so you can actually talk through your FM dial. So my mother sold real estate after my dad died. My mom sold real estate. So, they work late, and I was kind of a latchkey kid. And she would come in, at 7:30 at night, dog tired, 8 o'clock at night. And I'd have the Mr. Microphone and say, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome home. And she, so I've always been the talker. I was my high school. Do you remember homeroom class? You go, you sit down, the bell rings, and I go, okay, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And then you sit back down, and there's the kid who says, we've got fish sticks and tater tots today for lunch, and the junior varsity boys football teams leaving at 3 o'clock. Be sure to be at the bus. The announcements, morning announcements. I did the morning announcements in high school. I did college basketball in college. So I've always made a living talking. So I thought, well, hey, maybe I should become a speaker. So I had done a little bit of youth speaking because of my crazy upbringing. I had started speaking in 1988 to like summer camps and high schools and things like that, colleges and such, junior highs. So I kind of set myself up as a motivational speaker, and I started giving local talks at the Kiwanis Club and the Lions, like all the clubs, Rotary, Kiwanis, Lions, Eagles, all those kinds of things. So that's how I got my start. I kind of wrote my name on a shingle and said, I'm open for business. And I got my big break. My first big corporate break was a guy who went to my church, and he was a bigwig for Cisco Systems. And I said, I want to start doing like leadership stuff. And he said, well, I'm putting on a retreat in Bend, Oregon, with like 30 of my salespeople. He paid me $3,000. This was probably 1995, probably, or something like that. Now I had been giving free speeches, and I'd been, doing church groups and things like that. So I thought, man, I was in hog heaven at $3,000, and it was for a half a day. So, but I got a nice little trip to Bend, Oregon, and such. But that's how I got in. That's how I got involved in it.
That's awesome. Thank you. And it's so cool that you shared how here you were a little kid with your Mr. Microphone, right?
Mr. Microphone.
Really just kind of imagining your way into what seems to be a pretty beautiful rainbow colored path, to this life that you now live and the impact that you now have. And since our conversation today is about the art of influence, I know that is one of your areas of expertise that you speak about. What do you think that our listeners need to know? We'll start with kind of like what typically we would ask at an ending of a conversation like this. We'll start with that. What is one thing that you want them to take away from this conversation that we're about to get into?
That your ability to influence others is at the core of how much success you will have in almost any endeavor you participate in. Um, Whether it's parenting, how much influence do you have in your children's life? Whether it's your marriage, what's the kind of influence that you have with your spouse? Business, your neighborhood watch, how much influence do you have with your neighbors? You know, like everything we do, we're communicating, they're communicating, and we're all trying to sort of get our way. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, like I want to get my way, but we're all trying to persuade, and we're all trying to move the dial in one way or the other. And some people do it very well, and some people don't. There are there's a concept called hard power and soft power, and most people use hard power to influence, but the best is soft power to influence. So hard power would be, I'm your dad, that's why, you know, do this now or you're going to be on restriction. It's like hard power. Soft power is influence. It's like, hey, you know what? It would really make me happy if you would go and spend some time cleaning your room. You've promised me that you would do that. I'd like you to, I'd like you to uphold your word. Okay, Dad, I'll go do it. In both cases, you get them to go clean their room. But one is sort of crushing and powerful and whatever. And yeah, you get your way, but it doesn't create transformational relationship in any way. So it's very, very important, and it's important to learn to do it correctly in a way that is not just a one-time win, but it creates long-lasting relationship and transformation.
Thank you. That was really well said. And I imagine that a lot of the people listening or watching us now are saying, well, that makes sense. I can feel that in my own life when somebody gives me a directive, right? I'm less inspired to go do it. Yeah, it's almost like the stick, right? Like
Yeah.
go do it. So how can they do it the quote unquote right way to make it more sustainable and create that lasting trust and transformation?
Well, so the setup in my speeches in regard to this is that we typically ask, here's what I want to have. Tell me what I need to do. And we do it across the board. I want to be a millionaire. Tell me what I need to do. I want to have a great marriage. Tell me what I need to do. I want to get fit. Tell me what I need to do. And you do need to do things. There are certain things you need to do to have a great marriage, to make $1 million, whatever you're. But Zig Ziglar, who I had the great opportunity to co-host a television show with, he said there's one more part to the equation. It's not do have, it's be do have. And so my focus in terms of influence and leadership, I rarely talk about skill sets. Very rarely talk about. I mean, I can talk about skill sets, but as a leader, I think there's really one major skill set you have to master, and that's communication. But there's all sorts of nuance to the various things that we need to learn to be. And so I believe that in order to really have strong influence, it's more about working on who you are rather than figuring out what to do. Because if you work on what to do, but you don't work on who you are, like mindsets and beliefs and all those kinds of internal characteristics, it doesn't always last. And I'll give you an example. I'll give you two examples. One is somebody's 100 pounds overweight, and I want to lose this weight. Tell me what I need to do. Well, you need to go to the gym. You need to eat these foods. You need to XYZ elemental P. And they lose the weight. So they did the stuff and they got the result. But in their mind, they are not a skinny person. They are a fat person. They've always been fat. I'm a fat person. And they look at themselves in the mirror and they go, that's not me. Now they don't actually have these conversations. It's at a really deep subconscious level. There's a reason there's a television show called The Lottery Ruined My Life, because people will win a couple $1 million. And I'll tell you what, you get a couple $1 million. If you play your cards right, you should be able to live the rest of your life. You invest it right, you should never need another nickel as long as you live. And yet people will win a couple $1 million, and 3 or 4 years later, they're broke. The reason why is that they view themselves as a poor person. They don't know what to do with all this money. I shouldn't have, and again, might be at a really subconscious level. They don't believe themselves to be a wealthy person, and so they give up, and they it's almost like a thermostat. This is an analogy I like to use. What our beliefs are like a thermostat. It will always correct the outer to what it believes that it is. So if you live in Arizona, where I used to live, right, and if it's 100 degrees outside, and my thermostat is set at 70, but then I open the door and all that heat pours in, the thermostat says, wait a minute, it's 80, it's supposed to be 70, and it drags it right back down. Now, if it happened to be 30, really cold outside, and we set it for 70, we have the heater on and we open the door, and now all that cold air comes in, the thermostat says, wait a minute, it's supposed to be 70 in here, and it brings it up. Our belief system is really a lot like that. It's not just what you do, it's what you believe, because doing is really easy, right? I'm going to clap 3 times. Okay, it's easy. You just choose to do something. But it's the belief system that tells you whether or not you can accept that result and whether you should continue to do it. So I think that dealing with the internal is so important for people who are leaders, to figure out who you are. Because all you have to do is open up the news. I was going to say in a newspaper, but nobody reads newspapers anymore. But open up the morning news and you'll find some business person who has destroyed their entire career. Not necessarily because they did something wrong, but because not because of their skill set, but because they did something that a lack of integrity or undermined their character or something like that. So very, very important for us to take a look at that deeper character kind of thing.
Brilliant. I agree with you 100%. And here's kind of the kicker, because a lot of people are saying, all right, great, but I don't even have time to go and deal with all that stuff because I've got these fires to put out and I'm barely sleeping, I'm overworked, right? So it's like, what are some simple things that people can start doing right away to fit into their busy schedule to begin to shift some of those mindsets that are not aligned with what it is that they want to create or who they want to influence?
Well, first, I want to tip the apple cart over a little bit. If somebody is sitting there saying, I don't have the time for this, I'm saying you don't have the time not to do this. And here's why. So I used to teach time management seminars in the mid 90s. And I used to say that if you would spend more time planning, the execution actually becomes shorter and it becomes much more effective. So we say, I don't have time to plan. You don't have time to not plan. Like, you really need to plan. And if you'll take that extra time planning, it actually shortens the execution of it. So what I would say is, whatever level you're operating at right now with no personal development, I don't have time for personal development, don't have time to read books, don't have time to listen, whatever level, let's say you say, well, I'm operating at an 8 right now. And if I took time to do personal development, I'd drop to a 7. And I would say it's counterintuitive, but if you'll take the time for personal development, you will start operating at an 8.5 or a 9. Very counterintuitive, but that's the way it works. So I would say if somebody's just terrified of giving up too much time, start with 15 minutes. Wake up in the morning, keep a book right next to your bed. And when you wake up, spend 15 minutes, read a half a chapter a day. Just start putting things in. I would suggest that they should take a look at their friendships and the people that they're spending time with. There's the old saying, there are many different versions, but, in 5 years, you'll be like the 5 people you spend the most time with, or the books you read and the people you hang around with. I tell people all the time, in fact, I told somebody earlier on another interview today, I always like to be the dumbest and poorest guy in every group I'm in. Because if I'm the dumbest and poorest guy in every group I'm in, it means I'm hanging around with some pretty cool people. And it makes me better, And so I think that just making sure that you're in the right atmospheres, hanging around with the right people, and doing some ongoing personal development. I had 7 years that I got to spend, the last 7 years, of a guy named Jim Rohn, of his life. Jim was very, very famous in the personal development world, gave Tony Robbins his first job. Tony, at age 17, started selling Jim Rohn seminars. But he always used to say that your income seldom exceeds your personal development. He used to say, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. Doesn't mean that you don't work hard on your job. It just means you have to work harder on yourself. If you're achieving at a 7 and you improve yourself, you'll achieve at an 8. He used to say about sales, let's say that you close 10% of every person that you talk with, 1 out of 10. If you improve your sales skills and your communication skills and your people skills, what happens if you start closing 2 out of those 10 people? So personal development really, really, really is important. And I know some people, they kind of go, oh, I'm not going to go to a seminar, this, that, and the other thing. Oh, those motivational speakers, yada, yada. Pick up a book. It's easy now with Audible. You can listen to a book while you're driving. Zig Ziglar used to call it Automobile University back when they had cassettes. Buy cassettes and you can go to Automobile University. If he used to say, if you drive half hour each direction, just listen on the ride in. That's 2.5 hours a week. It's over 100 hours a year just on your ride into work. So I'm a big believer, obviously, in personal development, self-help and those kinds of things.
And Chris, you clearly have, if I may say, mastered the art of influence, right? If anyone were to do that, I mean, you are influencing thousands of people every week. And so I'm curious about what you have experienced in your own life and what mindset shifts you needed to make in order to have that influence, because I sense many people could get some good nuggets for themselves from hearing your story. What can you share with us?
Yeah, I've always been growing personally. Like, for example, over the whole pandemic, when we were all in lockdown, whatever, I came to a really interesting realization about myself. I just turned 56 yesterday. And so, I was 53, 54, 55 in the middle of the pandemic and whatever. And I thought to myself, wow, I'm 54 and I'm still figuring stuff out about myself. And here's a guy who travels all around the world telling people to figure out stuff. But, God gives it to you at the time that you need to learn it. I learned about myself that I have 2 very conflicting personality traits. On one hand, I want everybody to like me. And on the other hand, I cannot keep my opinions to myself. And so those 2 often create collision. And so what I really realized is I don't need to be liked by everybody. And so it was really transformation at 54. To go, I don't need to be liked, right? It's okay if people don't like me. In fact, it's probably good if everybody doesn't like me, because if you don't take a stand and you don't have an opinion, those kinds of things. So those are some. I grew up very angry and bitter because my dad died when I was 4, 28 homes, 11 different schools, shipped off to live with relatives twice. My mom had borderline personality disorder. I took a lot of beatings. Anything long and flexible, I've been beaten. Look around the house. If you see anything long and flexible, I guarantee you I've been beaten with it. The cord from the iron, belts, go pick a switch outside. My worst Christmas ever. It was my best and my worst Christmas ever. I was about 8 years old and I got Hot Wheels. The little cars. I got Hot Wheels. And I got my mom bought me 16 Hot Wheels. I had the ambulance and the cop car and the Corvette and the fire truck. And yes. And then I looked in the box and I saw 20 pieces of 3-foot long orange plastic track. And I went, oh boy, how long until I get beaten with the racetrack? Sure enough, it didn't take very long, until I was getting whipped with racetrack from my Hot Wheels. And so I grew up very angry. I spent a lot of time. My mom took me to Children's Orthopedic Hospital in Seattle, the behavioral sciences wing. I still remember the guy that saw me every week, Wednesdays. And after I'd grown up and got my life together and was achieving some success in the world, I was down at the hospital visiting somebody, and I went, I wonder if he still works here. And I went up to the behavioral sciences clinic and I asked if he was, there. And they said, no, he's not here. He still does work here. And so I pulled my business card out and I handed it to him. I said, will you please give this to him and tell him that I turned out all right? And I had to overcome a lot of that anger, a lot of fighting. I felt like I had to fight for everything in my early years. And then I just realized that fighting with people doesn't really produce success. And so I learned to, handle all those kinds of things. And it's all just a matter. And we all have our journey. We all have our pasts. We all have things that we need to grow in. Some of us are too aggressive. Some of us are too passive based on our upbringing. Some of us are, we will take every risk in the world. Others of us won't take any risks at all. So it's not like you have to go be this way. It's take a look at yourself in the mirror. I do this a lot in my speeches. I hold my hands up. This is the mirror. You got to look in the mirror and say, what is it that I have to deal with to make me whole? Everybody else is living their own journey. He's got an anger problem. She's got a drinking problem. He's got a, whatever. Let them do their own thing. That's their life. That's their journey. What's my journey? And what do I need to change so that I become the type of person that projects strength and kindness and success and confidence and those kinds of things?
Oh, thank you for sharing that story. And by the way, happy belated birthday.
Thank you.
So it's so cool. You've just given us such an awesome example of what you shared, as we started this conversation, that it's kind of an inside out job, right? Influence. Yes, there are all kinds of strategies and tactics, but those might not last in terms of the sustainable influence. Um, what does work is going inward and saying, okay, what are those things, those thoughts that I might have that are not serving me about myself, or maybe there's some anger or some emotion that I'm holding on to, which is being projected out and maybe impacting my results. So you mentioned kind of as a starting point for people to kind of get up in the morning and, it sounds like condition their mind, right? Maybe read something, listen to something, so, or maybe if they're driving, as you said, the automobile university, what else can they do to really like understand what are their mindsets? Like what is actually impacting their ability to influence?
Well, so I don't remember where I picked this up. I always try to give people credit when I'm sharing something. So this is not original to me. But sit down and just write money. Write the word money and then say, what do I really believe about money? What do I believe about it? What do I believe about being wealthy? T. Harv Eker wrote a great book called The Millionaire Mindset. He talked about the belief systems that we have about money. There are some people who do not believe that it's good or that you can be a good person and have money. I'll tell you a funny story. I was 14 years old. My mom, she sold real estate, but she was also working at Group Health Hospital in Seattle. And I don't even know what she did, but she had a friend there and he was in record filing. He was a 40-year-old man who spent every single day filing those little manila. I mean, I cannot even imagine that job. I'd be done after like the first 2 hours. I'd be ready to just quit. I'd rather be homeless. And he wanted out. He wanted to have some money. So he borrowed $7,000 from his rich uncle. And he bought the rights for Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Alaska for a self-watering flower pot. So it was actually really cool. It was like it was made out of like Tupperware material, hard plastic material. And it was a bowl, and that's where you put the water. Then it had another one where you put the plant and the dirt and you set it down into that bowl. And there was like a little nipple that went down into the bottom bowl. And then it had a little sliding thing on the side. And if you slid it to the far right, it took a lot of water out. If you slid it to the far left, it took less water out. So if you have a cactus, you put it on the far left. If you have an African violet, you put it on the far right. And I was 14 years old. And he says to me, Chris, how would you like to make some money? And I said, sure. What do you got? And he said, I'll pay you $1 for every one of these that you sell. And I said, bingo, let's do it. So he gave me a couple of samples and he thought I was going to go knock on doors of little old ladies and sell them one at a time. Not what I did. I was 14 years old. My mom bought me my first blue blazer. And she dropped me off on the corner of a street in downtown Seattle because I scheduled an appointment with the buyer of one of the largest regional home stores. Now, this was before Home Depot. It was before everything was sort of regional. There were no big national chains. Maybe Ace Hardware was national, but I scheduled an appointment. You can imagine the shock when in walks a 14-year-old with a baggy blue blazer holding a flower pot. And I said, this is a self-watering flower pot. And he's like, all right, show me. Well, it didn't have a plant in it. So I filled this one with water. I set this one in. Nothing was coming, from the bottom up. And then I slid the dial and he just went like this. His eyes just went, whoa, look at that. It truly was a self-watering flower pot. So he says, I'll tell you what, I'll do a 1-year test run through 20 stores. I will buy 100 per month for each store for a year. So you do the math, right? It's 400 per store, 20 stores. All of a sudden I sold 24,000 flower pots on my first sales call I ever went. I was 14 years old. I sold 24,000 flower pots. So I go back to this guy and I said, hey, I sold some flower pots. And he goes, really? How many? And I held up the purchase order. It was more like, there were only 24 per box. It was more like 23,800 or something like that. And I said, 23,752. And I kid you not, he called the company, not the store that bought him. He called the company that he had licensed it from and said, I want my money back. I'm done. I'm not going to do this. This is that belief system. Here, success dropped right into his lap. And he said, whoa, I can't do that. Whoa, 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 whoa. Because if I was making $1 a pot, who knows how much he was making per pot, and he literally gave it up and went back to filing records. Now, why my mother didn't find $7,000 somewhere to buy the region so that I could have paid off my entire college with that. But she didn't. Alas, she didn't. But that's the kind of mindset. There are people who are terrified of success. They're terrified of money. I would say the same thing about love. I'm unlucky in love. How many people we heard that? I'm no good at relationships. Marriage just isn't for me. Those are belief systems. And if you find somebody and you get in a whirlwind romance and then you get married and you go, marriage just isn't for me. You've told yourself that for 20 years. Well, what is your mind and your subconscious going to start doing? Wait a minute, marriage isn't for you. We better destroy this. We got to figure out a way to destroy this, right? If you think that you're a bad leader and you think nobody listens to you and you think you don't have, it's going to come out in the way that you interact with people, and you will. It really is self-sabotage, and people do it all the time in relationships, with money, and in business.
Thank you. And what's interesting is that most of that is unconscious, right? We're not aware that we're doing it, that those unconscious belief systems are basically dictating how we think, how we feel, how we behave, right? And it is that self-fulfilling, self-sabotaging prophecy, or sometimes it's self-enhancing, life-enhancing. If we've got positive beliefs about our abilities, right? Myself as a leader, my ability to influence, my ability to achieve the abundance that I truly want, and that I'm worthy of it.
Well,
And that
now a
is,
lot of it comes from your upbringing. What did your parents tell you about marriage? What did your parents tell you about money? I'll give you another example. My son he was going to go work for a company called Sleep Country USA. And Sleep Country was a Seattle group, and it was purchased, started by a friend of mine, and then it was purchased by Sleep Train, which was like a San Diego West Coast, and Sleep Train, Sleep Country. And my son wanted to go sell mattresses. He was 22 or something like that, and he gets invited to come down for an interview. Now, at that interview was the district manager, the regional manager, and for some reason, the entire owner of the company was there that day. He was like in the area and he's like, I'm going to sit in on some of your interviews. So he sits down with my son and asks him all these questions. And at the very end, he says, look, here's the deal. If you do 50% of your goals, you'll make $50,000 a year. You do 80% of your goals, you make $80,000 a year. You do 100% of your goals, you make $100,000 a year. If you do 120% of your goals, you'll make $120,000 a year. Which one of those are you? The owner of the company asked him this question, and my son, 22 years old, laughed in his face. He goes, yeah. And the boss goes, do you think that's funny? And my son goes, oh, is that a serious question? And he goes, yes, it's a serious question. He goes, oh, 120. And then he looks and he goes, does anybody pick anything else? Like he literally said, does somebody pick something else? And the guy goes, yeah, actually hardly anybody picks 120. And he goes, oh, well, yeah, I would want to make the most money I can, and I can set goals, and I'm good at following directions. So yeah, I would do the 120. So they said, fine, we'll, be gone. We'll let you know in 2 weeks. 10 minutes later, he's driving home and his cell phone rings. And the manager says, the boss loved that answer so much. You're hired. He got the job. Within a year, he was the top salesman in that entire company, 300 salespeople. Then they made him a manager. Every store that he took over became the top selling store in there that it had ever done. Well, he got home that day and he told me this story. And we were living in what had been my dream house. I bought it when I was 38. It was built when I was 17. And I used to the front gate was 500 feet long, brick pillars, wrought iron, big, like I called them Elvis gates, quarter-mile circular driveway, 1,800 bottle wine cellar. Like I drove by this house for 21 years, and I would stop at the front gate and say, I'm going to buy that house someday. So when my son was a little boy, we moved into this house. It was so spectacular that when we moved in, the movers who had just picked our stuff up at our last house, they came through the gate and they go, did you guys win the lottery or what happened here? And so he comes home, he walks into this house that was my dream house, and he says, why would anybody pick anything else? And I said, it's really from your upbringing, son. I've been very ambitious and goal setting and things, but every time we had parties, my friends were very successful people. One was a president of a major league sports team. One was a guy that ran for governor and owned tens of millions of dollars of real estate. And so my son was being groomed from a very early age. It was natural for him. Like my friends would come over and we'd talk about, one of my friends was like, yeah, I'm buying an apartment complex for $9 million. So these numbers were normal for him because of his upbringing. It crafted his subconscious. It crafted his belief system because that's all he knew. And I said, but son, there are people they don't know anybody in their family who's ever made $100,000 a year. So for them, they think picking 80% at $80,000 a year is about as big as they can get. So a lot of it has to do with upbringing. What do we believe about money? What has our family taught us about money? What have our circumstances taught us about money? And not just money, fitness, health, love, you name it. We need to take a look at those belief systems and make sure that they are congruent with what we really want out of life.
Thank you for that. It's so brilliant that you're sharing this, Chris, because you've kind of nailed it into like two main things, is what I'm perceiving here. One is the clarity of the intention, right? Here you were for all those years in front of those gates, right? You imagined it, right? With your Mr. Microphone, you imagined it, you embodied it, right? In your imagination, you were already there. You were priming your body, your brain for that future event, right? Lessening some of the resistance, right? But also kind of getting you more clear about what you wanted, adding more momentum to that. And at the same time, being very mindful of any inner resistance that we might have, right? Some of those subconscious beliefs, for example, right? So it's like when we have a clear intention and when we have the aligned beliefs, as you said, it's all about alignment, then it just feels natural and comfortable for the body. And it's going to help you to get that because it's going to give you what you expect to be true. So it's like almost the recipe is, hey, let's get clear about what specifically you want, how you're going to feel when you have it. And let's identify if there are any mindsets that you have, maybe from your parents, maybe from others, maybe from TV, or maybe you just don't even know how you got it, but you just think that about yourself. When you sit down and write, let's say your beliefs about money or your beliefs about relationships, as you recommended for people to do, and to recondition themselves to new beliefs, because just like your son got it over and over from watching you model those beliefs, hearing them and those beliefs and those kind of stories and the dinner parties that made him believe, absolutely, it's possible for me to do this, it's safe for me to do this. And so people can do that for themselves regardless of who they grew up as their father, mother, grandfather, grandmother, and so on. So what can they do to recondition those old mindsets?
Well, the first is self-awareness. And I've done a lot of thinking about self-awareness the last 10 years, because until you become self-aware, you can't change anything and you don't know that you need to change anything. So I used to do a thing with my staff where back when I was a pastor, actually, I would bring our staff in and I would ask them 4 or 5 questions, and I would put them all at the table, and I had a yellow legal pad and I called it a follower's evaluation. So typically the leader evaluates everybody else. I gave the folks on my team the ability to evaluate me. And I would ask them, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What should I continue doing all the time? What should I stop doing immediately? And anything else that you want to tell me. And at first it was hard because they were like, is this a trick? Like, is he asking us to say something so he can can us? I will never forget, as long as I live, to this day, and this was 30 years ago, the woman who ran our women's ministry, she says to me, having a conversation with you is often like playing catch with my dad when I was a little girl. And I said, really? Well, what do you mean? He said, well, he never really wanted a girl. And she was a little bit of a tomboy, growing up. And so she would beg him to go play catch in the backyard. He did not want to go play catch with her, but he thought, like, oh, I got to be a dad. I got to go out and play catch. So he said, Chris, when he would throw me the ball and I turned to throw it back to him, I had to hit him with the ball somewhere in here. If I threw it over his head or I threw it on the ground, he didn't even bend over to try to get it. If it went past him, I had to go get the ball. He didn't work very hard at catching. And if I missed him, I had to go get the ball. She said, I kind of feel like that with you when I'm talking to you. Like if I make it really easy and it's really easily graspable, then it's fine. But you don't work very hard at trying to understand me. 30 years ago, she told me that. And I tell this on almost every podcast when we even get in the remote area of this kind of conversation, because it profoundly affected me to this day, where I say, am I working hard to hear this person? Instead, I can feel the frustration. I can feel the dismissal rising up in me. I can feel the natural, I don't have time for this. But then I go, no, that's not the right way to deal with this. And I focus, okay, what is this person really trying to communicate to me? And it allows me to be a better leader, better influencer, better salesperson. It allows me to do that because of the self-awareness that one of my staff people gave me nearly 30 years ago. So you have to understand what your strengths and your weaknesses are. And one of the best things to do is ask somebody and give them real permission. There's an Old Testament Bible verse that says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. Don't go to somebody who doesn't love you. Don't go to somebody who's your sworn enemy, because they're going to use that as an opportunity to stick you with a knife. But if you go to your wife or husband, if you go to your grown children or even your younger children, if you go to your best friends, if you go to your closest coworkers and say, you know what, I'm really trying to improve myself as a person. I'm really trying to improve myself as a leader. Would you be willing to give me some feedback? And if you can communicate in an authentic, transparent way and really, truly give them permission. And here was the other rule. I told them, I will not respond to you. I'm not going to go, wait a minute, I don't do that. I promised them that I would stay quiet. I said, I may ask for a clarifying question, like, so do you mean this? Oh, okay. And I sat down and I had a legal pad in front of me and I wrote down what they said and I listened. And then I went away and I asked myself and I prayed and I'm like, is this true about me? And if it is, how do I change that? But you have to give them permission and you have to follow up on allowing them to do it. Because if you react, they're never going to do it again. But wounds from a friend can be trusted. It may feel like a wound when they tell you something, but it can be trusted because you know that the people you're asking are the people who have your best interest in mind. So I think one of the best things for self-awareness is to go ask the people who know you best.
That's such a cool recommendation. And our mutual friend, Rabbi Pinchas Alush, who was also a guest on this podcast, said, in his conversation, we had a conversation about purpose and meaning. And he said that the people in your life are often your greatest teachers, right? To go and ask. And so, and that's really cool because they can help you to become conscious of what might be completely unconscious to you. And you cannot access it necessarily on your own. And sometimes it's mirrored back to you through others in those trusting relationships. And it also brings us back to that soft, impact influence that you talked about earlier around just being, right? Before the doing, to just be present with people. Because in order to get that information, we need to be present, to be curious and compassionate, not judgmental, as you said, or punitive in any way. And so you've given us so many pretty amazing tips about how to influence others. And essentially, it starts with us, with gaining that self-awareness about what are some things that we're projecting out there, some beliefs about ourselves, our ability to lead, to persuade, to influence, maybe our worthiness or deservingness of greater success in our life, whatever that might be. And when we become conscious of those, to make an effort, a deliberate effort to rewire, reprogram those old belief systems. And that's absolutely possible to do through repetition, whether it's doing that in the mirror, whether it's conditioning our mind with more empowering thoughts, as you said, every morning. There are, of course, many other tools and techniques, many of which are shared on this podcast for doing that. So, Chris, I am so deeply grateful to you for sharing from your heart today. And sharing your stories. There are such beautiful nuggets for us, lessons for us in those stories.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's when we tell our stories, other people can learn from those stories. It's important to be a lifelong learner. You brought up the rabbi. He and I met on LinkedIn when I lived in Scottsdale. I reached out to him. We met on LinkedIn, and we went to coffee together, and we both felt like we'd met our long lost brother, and just became fast friends. And I mentioned that I'd been a pastor. And so, in Christianity, you tend to focus on the New Testament, even though you also talk about the Old Testament. But I didn't know much. Even in Bible college, I didn't really study that much Old Testament, or particularly Jewish tradition and those kinds of things. So I asked him, I said, would you meet with me every week and give me a book that we can go through, because I want to learn about you and your community and all that. And he gave me a book called Think Jewish. That was the name of the book, Think Jewish. And every week we met. I would go over to the synagogue and we'd sit in his office, and we would meet, and I learned. And I was probably 52, 53 at the time. And it was great for me just to learn. And whether you're learning about finances, or you're learning about religion, or you're learning about relationships, it's all about continuing to learn and growing. We're on a journey. Some of us get a very, very long journey. Others, it's a medium length journey, and others have a very short journey. But to me, Jim Rohn and I wrote in our book, it's not how long you live, but it's how well you live. And learning is a part of living well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think to add to that in the context of this conversation, it's learning and then also giving. Yes, because influence is very much about a higher cause, if you will, a bigger purpose than ourselves. And so, thank you once again. How
Yeah,
can people learn more about you, about your incredible talks and programs?
yeah, they can connect with me. I'm on Facebook, Chris Widener Speaker, Instagram, Chris Widener Speaker, Twitter at Chris Widener. But yeah, they can Google my name, and they can find also at chriswidener.com. Chris at Chris Widener is my email. Anyway, I bought up all the domains a long time ago, so any Chris Widener domain is going to probably point toward me.
Brilliant. Well, once again, from my heart, thank you for your
Yeah, thank
time,
you.
your wisdom, your love, and I wish you continued success and influence.
Thank you.